Hey friends, howdy. Hey y'all, I'm pleased to greet everyone. Hey there at the premiere. This is the YouTube channel Feygin World, and we thank everyone who gathered around their screens to support our broadcast. My name is Alyona Kurbanova. Today we're going to be hanging out with politicians, opposition figures, and blogger Mark Feygin discussing the most important news that will undoubtedly have a huge impact on the whole world. Let's talk about America. Let's talk about what's happening there and what to expect in the near future, and of course, what will affect Europe, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation, among others. And we'll be infinitely grateful to everyone who stays with us, who won't forget to give us a like, support us, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hey, Mark, how's it? Just wanted to say hi.
Happy to welcome Alyona. Happy to welcome the entire English-speaking YouTube audience. We are optimistic that this inaugural broadcast will jumpstart our project, assist in attracting attention to it, and we will be available to you consistently, engaging in discussions about political news, dear viewers.
Yes, folks, there's going to be a special shout out and request to those who not only understand Russian, but also might have once been a part of the Russian-speaking world. Right now, we're speaking in English. We would greatly appreciate it if you could help us spread this video. You got to recommend him to your buddies, pals, neighbors, and that's going to be a seriously important help. Here, we'll explain why the war in Ukraine isn't just about Ukrainians, not only Europe, but the whole world, you know. Mark, let's start with the fact that after Big Tuesday ends in the United States of America, we already understand, I think, that most Americans understand how the 2024 elections in the USA can practically look like 100%. Most likely it will be Trump, most likely it will be Biden, but Trump has already managed to invite Biden to a debate, wants to talk, of course, discuss the most pressing issues for Americans and maybe for the whole world. Are these events important, and can debates like this really explain to Americans as well as representatives of other countries what Biden wants and what Trump will do?
Well, I believe there are numerous specialists who can provide input on the domestic political agenda and other matters pertaining to the United States on their own. Seriously analyze the upcoming debates, so to speak, by breaking them down into their constituent components. And for us, the question of how the candidates see things is interesting, and probably this will take its part in the debates, its place for discussion, how they see international politics, and first of all, the course of the war in Ukraine, the role of Russia, the aggressive role of Moscow, the current authorities there, and some influence it will have on America and its voters. For us, it is of utmost importance, to take note of the fact that the real American elections will essentially have a defining impact on the future and fate of Ukraine itself, the role of Russia and Moscow in the international process, and partially, of course, what the European and Western world will be like in terms of their political landscape, economic stability, and global influence. The fact is, no one should be under the illusion that Moscow is closely monitoring these elections, most likely even the debates, and definitely sympathizing with candidate Trump. Do not deceive yourself here in Moscow. They view him as a pro-Moscow and anti-Ukrainian candidate, even if these characteristics are exaggerated. Nevertheless, Moscow, driven by its own interests, will undoubtedly seek to influence the American elections. Let nobody have any illusions about this. We observe repeatedly that many individuals who are part of either Trump's team or closely connected to his program and his statements express sympathy towards Moscow, travel to Moscow, such as Tucker Carlson, a very well-known American journalist who formerly hosted on Fox News. He talks about it in his programs, and from this point of view, the American debates are also of interest to Ukraine, because the ongoing issue of allocating aid in Congress is undoubtedly linked to the actions of Trump's associates among Republican congressmen. The current problem with allocating aid in Congress is undoubtedly related to the actions of Trump's entourage among Republican congressmen. This is all being closely examined and scrutinized by the Russian side, and of course they are actively trying to exert influence on the outcome of the war in Ukraine through their support and endorsement of Trump. Make Kyiv, through the new leadership of the United States in case Trump comes to power, make Kyiv go to these peaceful negotiations, which essentially, if the demands of Moscow are fulfilled, would be a capitulation of Ukraine to the Kremlin. And thus, of course, despite the fact that foreign policy issues are not always priorities for an American company, it is precisely the issues of war and peace, the issues of Ukraine, and the attitude towards Moscow's aggression that can become crucial. Nobody is assuming responsibility off the present US Democratic administration for the fact that it has, from a certain point, I believe, from the middle of last year, adopted a more cautious stance in terms of supporting Ukraine and the Ukrainian leadership in the war. Commencing from the NATO summit in Vilnius, we undeniably witnessed a noticeable cooling off from the American administration in their relations with the leadership in Kiev, indicating a clear shift in dynamics. And this is possibly due to the fact that the tactics of the American leadership towards the end of the war in Ukraine have changed. They no longer aim for a victory for Ukraine, which used to mean liberating the territory of Ukraine up to its 1991 borders. Instead, they now take a position that avoids Ukraine's defeat, allowing for some compromise on territorial issues, including the 20% of Ukrainian territory currently occupied by Moscow, as well as other matters such as the demilitarization of Ukraine and the separate issue of federalizing the currently unitary state of Ukraine in order to achieve a peaceful resolution. All of these things, they are unlikely to be discussed in detail by the candidates, namely Trump and accordingly Biden. But it is worth remembering that the fate of the war will depend on the positions expressed by them during the course of the discussions. So let's hope and keep an eye out, hoping that this issue will receive proper attention in these debates, and we'll be closely watching how they unfold.
Noting that, of course, there will be an internal American agenda. The crucial question for every American, from another point of view, we're talking about foreign policy right now, and that's also really important. I'd be interested not just asking about upcoming possible debates, but I think we should ask Democrats, Joe Biden, why Lend-Lease was needed, which never worked. He was a lifesaver. However, at present, when we encounter difficulties in distributing assistance for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, he would be of great utility to us. From an alternative perspective, it would be intriguing to ask Trump, what is the deal with ending the war in a span of 24 hours? A truly enormous mistake. Donald Trump and even the present-day administration, they consistently talk about war every 2 years without fail. The war in Ukraine began in 2014, so it's been 10 years, and Donald Trump, of course, got involved with it. It was a whole different ballgame, a whole different pace, but Crimea had already been annexed, Donetsk and Luhansk regions were already occupied, and we already had Russian troops on our soil. So 24 hours seems like populism to you, or is there really some kind of plan, a scenario? Why spill all the cards at once?
Well, on the whole, Trump is a quirky politician, you know. I mean, he's the kind of guy who replaces political substance with snappy phrases and slogans, prioritizing style over substance. Undoubtedly, he firmly believes that as a shrewd businessman, he can extrapolate and apply these successful approaches that he has implemented in his business ventures to the complex realm of politics. We observed this occurrence during his term of office from 2016 to 2020. He is similar to a developer, resembling a businessman who aims to maximize profit. He firmly believes that he can negotiate with anyone, including Putin, and is confident that he will offer such favorable conditions that will be acceptable to Moscow and to Putin himself, the leader of Russia. Because he originates from a compromise of advantages, when a compromise is achieved that satisfactorily meets the interests of both parties in a general sense. Putin remains steadfast in his position. No information is disclosed. This is the reason why, incidentally, I believe that they will not reach a consensus, regardless of whether Trump assumes the presidency and proposes an 80-20 arrangement, with 80% of Ukraine going to the West, as I comprehend it, as his approach to negotiating. 80% goes to the West, 20% Putin keeps for himself, but Putin needs 100%. He is not going to play businessman by compromising and maximizing profit, like I said earlier. He's all about getting everything he wants, no exceptions. He thinks he can have it all when it comes to Ukraine. And that's the reason why it can become an obstacle and definitely won't permit a duration of 24 hours. We get that this is a figure of speech, but in 24 hours, they won't agree. The question will arise. And if they didn't come to an agreement, how is Trump going to protect American interests on one hand and not lose face on the other hand? Because yielding on Ukraine and the war would mean losing face. For him, it's like for a politician, like for a businessman. And at this moment, if he becomes president of the United States of America, Trump has always, even during his first term from 2016 to 2020, displayed confidence, incredible confidence as the top official of the United States. And he can't afford weakness either. But maybe he doesn't fully understand that the situation has fundamentally changed. Yeah, the war began in 2014, but it wasn't as widespread as it became in February 2022. But it was easier to handle this situation, much easier from 2016 to 2020 when he was the president of the United States. Currently, he will not have the chance, as he will be in negotiations with a representative of the country that is displaying aggression towards its neighboring nation, along with Moscow. This is a full-scale war with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of casualties, where the infrastructure of Ukraine is being destroyed and innocent civilians are dying. The responsibility for negotiations is significantly higher in this devastating conflict. She's not the same as she used to be, like when, for example, Trump during his presidency even met with the same leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Despite being the same old negotiator, Kim Jong-un is a tough cookie in negotiations. In this situation, everything will be much worse because any concession or loss to Putin will come at the cost of people's lives, making it an extremely high price to pay. And that's why Trump, without realizing the full extent of his responsibility, uses pre-election rhetoric that comes more from a businessman than a global-scale politician, let alone the leader of the entire Western world. If he refuses this role entirely, he will lose both his position as the top official in America and his status as a global leader. He will not have a chance in either capacity. His isolationism, if he appeals to it, will play a nasty trick on him, do him a disservice, if you will, which in general will lead to his defeat on a larger scale. This lack of opportunity will ultimately be detrimental to his chances of success in both capacities. So let us determine whether this is merely election rhetoric concerning the 24 hours he spends negotiating with Putin, or if it is indeed a genuine desire to shirk responsibility for the war that is happening in the region of Eastern Europe at this current moment in time. That's it.
Note that both ex-President Trump and current President Biden, and someone from them potentially, have influence on whether Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan will receive additional support. This is to prevent or potential war in the case of Taiwan and to defend themselves in the case of Israel and Ukraine already at war. Who hasn't reached out to Joe Biden? Who hasn't reached out to congressmen to finally move this issue forward? The latest in politics is that 12 high-ranking officials have already approached Joe Biden saying, just find the words, find the approach to the congressman. I will allow myself to say, as someone who lives in Kiev, thanks to the Americans who pay their taxes, thanks to the American officials, presidents, we have, for example, the Patriot air defense system here. This is truly a massive symbol in the greatness of American weaponry, American, German, and defense systems and capabilities. The number of lives saved is impossible to convert. We know the Patriot is still in action, shooting down Russian aircraft in the ongoing conflict. So it appears to me that in these specific examples, we should emphasize on one hand our deep gratitude to the American people, and on the other hand, remind everyone that without such assistance, innocent people will die. Your thoughts, Mark, what more must we do? What haven't we tried to pass this obstacle? I get it, there's a question of America's security, the border, but nevertheless, because here America's prestige is also at stake.
You know, I would like to draw attention to an important detail in all ongoing discussions that are currently taking place on this particular issue. It is akin to an appeal directed at American taxpayers, conveying that this money is being funneled into an unfathomable pit for the war in Ukraine, extending support to Ukraine, but simultaneously pressuring them to invest greater and greater amounts into this protracted conflict that shows no signs of resolution. This thesis does not sound like the main one, but it is still present. It is astonishing that during the 2-year war, almost 300 billion Russian assets, state assets, located in Russia, Russian assets located in the USA, for some reason, were not utilized to alleviate this burden on the American budget and the American obligations to support Ukraine, as they should have been. Instead, they should have been used to finance these military orders and, in turn, avoid the necessity of utilizing American funds, which would have helped to mitigate the impact on the American economy and reduce the strain on taxpayers. And 2 years, a span of 2 years that were spent on discussion, were dedicated to discussing how to accomplish it. And I must say, even now, despite the ongoing discussions, how to utilize the seized frozen Russian assets in favor of Ukraine, this question remains unresolved. We are discussing lend-lease debates in the House of Representatives and the Senate of the US Congress, but for some reason, this question, which would alleviate, at least temporarily, at least partially, the problem of financing aid to Ukraine, is not being discussed at the proper level. The necessary decisions are not being made that could quickly implement this plan and provide the much needed financial assistance to Ukraine. This 300 billion is nearly 5 times greater than the amount that Congress has been discussing for a period of 4 months in order to allocate aid to Ukraine. Do you comprehend? If the Biden administration, maybe with the assistance of some allies among the Republican congressmen, paid attention to this issue, a lot would be resolved much faster than the current pace of progress. Yes, even though it would cause additional difficulties in the relationship between Washington and Moscow. However, the current situation between Russia and America is extremely dire. In this particular scenario, exacerbating the situation by removing these funds and transferring them to Ukraine, specifically referring to the 300 billion Russian assets in America, which are funds held in securities by the central bank, would at the very least provide some relief for some of the issues and discussions surrounding assistance to Ukraine. You understand? What other options do we have? Well, I suppose we could potentially achieve some kind of further compromise, which has already been accomplished through the demands from the Republicans concerning the Mexican border, the overall situation with illegal immigration, which has been addressed by the Biden administration. I comprehend, this is a slogan for a political campaign, I comprehend the dispute is specifically between the Republican and Democratic parties, but it does not make it any simpler for Ukraine. The delay in this assistance creates new problems, including for the United States themselves. You can say that this kind of policy cynically understands this dispute is cynical because it disregards the interests of Ukraine, which is at war. It is addressed to the official circles of America, the demands from Ukraine, the requests from Ukraine as allies. They are legitimate, they are justified. This is a war situation, not a situation of investing in the economy, supporting some reforms in Ukraine. This is a matter of survival. This is a question of war and peace. So here you must solve all of this using the most important tools that are available to you. This is a political compromise between the forces that are at odds in the elections in the United States of America. If this compromise is ultimately reached, I am uncertain whether any individual, be it Republicans, Trump, or candidate Biden, will receive substantial bonus points, which would enable them to definitively ascertain the victor in the forthcoming November elections. The Ukrainian issue, in spite of its intensity, is not at the core, not the primary one. However, in any case, that would alleviate some of the accountability for the casualties because, well, at the very least, we could have compensated them, they could argue. Both, by the way, and the other. That's why for Trump and his supporters and Republicans who are blocking the adoption, or rather the appointment of Johnson as the Speaker of the House, this issue, the issue of voting on it, would at the very least be able to remove any claims against them as responsible for the deaths of people in Ukraine. And that is the reason why this issue is so crucial and contentious, with significant implications for the political landscape. Here's what I think.
Regarding the bottomless barrel and the reason why US taxpayers should provide support to a certain country, this is the actual appearance of the formula. They only started publishing it, unfortunately, at the end of the 23rd year. Too late, yeah, time was wasted, and too much anti-propaganda has already worked, so this money is going nowhere. They stay in America. First, I want to say that the US Treasury head, in my opinion, hit the nail on the head when she said Congress's inaction on Ukraine is a gift to Putin and Iran. In short, it's not only about Ukraine, it's not only about Europe, but also about other European unions. In America, it's gaining strength currently. Where on earth did the money go that was allocated for the purpose of supporting the Ukrainian armed forces prior to this? Pennsylvania got more than $2.3 billion, the highest among all. The funds were used for purchasing and investing in weapon production in the United States of America. But at the same time, there we see a trend where Republican congressmen representing this state, they vote against aid to Kiev. In Arizona, 3 out of 6 Republicans voted against it. Even though the state made over $2 billion from the aid, almost $2.2 billion, but they think it's not worth it. In Texas, where they produce 155 caliber ammunition, which is very important for us as a weapon for Ukraine, they spent almost $1.5 billion from the budget. Meanwhile, 18 out of 25 Republicans representing this state voted against the aid. In plain English, these are jobs, these are taxes, this is income for America itself. The system is operational, military-industrial complex. Trust me, we would have initiated it if Ukrainian regions didn't attack us. So the money stays within America, everything related to weapons, modernization, and it's like America is in the plus, but why doesn't Mark's argument work, or did those who oppose this aid just blur it out or fail to see its impact and implications?
Well, I have to say, Americans certainly know how to count their money. They even have an immense love for it. Because naturally, Americans are not going to act against their own interests in this sense. That is obviously true and undeniable as well. The military-industrial complex is the most powerful, specifically in the United States of America, and possesses a full range of necessary military products that it can manufacture for Ukraine. Additionally, the actual self-financing of this activity, this industrial activity, is in the interests of the United States themselves, and this fact is also obvious and undeniable. By the way, we should make a mention of the First and Second World Wars, which in general significantly boosted the American economy. I comprehend in the 21st century things function in a somewhat different way because warfare has genuinely acquired a more technological character, akin to, I would argue, a scientific level, if you prefer to put it that way. And production has changed, significantly changed, although it still includes traditional areas of tank production, aircraft production, missiles, and so on. But there are also new technological types of products that require additional investments. How exactly can the war in Ukraine contribute to this if we talk strictly from an economic point of view? Because it stimulates precisely these new types of production. This is the production of drones, this is the production of certain types of rockets, and so on and so on and so on. But I want to emphasize once again that yes, there is also a benefit in this, but it would be even greater if all the bold decisions regarding the frozen funds were taken. The presence of Russian funds and the intermittent nature of this discussion, with it sometimes happening and sometimes not happening, sometimes starting and sometimes ending, serves as evidence that there is a lack of political will from the American leadership to offer additional incentives for the military-industrial complex of America. This can be attributed to their evaluation of the risks involved in complicating relations with Moscow. I would like to assign a name to a single digit. The American agencies themselves have indicated that American companies operating in Russia have incurred losses of up to $114 billion, I believe, as a result of Moscow requisitioning and seizing these assets from American companies, handed the documents over to their own controlled entities involved in economic activity, specifically Russian companies. Then a reasonable question arises, if Moscow can afford to behave in this manner towards private American business, Why is it not possible for the American government, the American leadership, to behave in this manner towards Russian state assets? So I would state that this question necessitates its own and close attention and a final solution. The industry in the United States is in need of additional investments, and it would be beneficial if Russian money could contribute to providing an extra boost to the military-industrial complex in the form of these external funds, which will be offered as assistance to Ukraine. Let's hope that such decisions will be made.
Another important aspect is that where the United States is becoming weaker, where they want to isolate themselves from the rest of the world, China always comes in. And he is Donald Trump and some other bright politicians who dropped out of the presidential race, like Vivi Karama with you, called the main enemy of the United States of America. It's really important to understand that if the United States of America doesn't help Ukraine right now, doesn't even show an active position in diplomacy, it leaves a certain void, and that's when Beijing comes into play again. On March 7th, Li Huei, China's special representative, arrived in Kyiv to discuss a specific resolution to our war, although they always refer to it as the crisis in Ukraine. No crisis, it's a war. Against the backdrop of his arrival, he visited Moscow, already been to European countries, had conversation with President Zelensky, and more. Before that, China was suggesting to hold an international conference in order to regulate the war, The Chinese foreign minister said this, and it is proposed to invite everyone to this conference, including Russia. And it is emphasized that all parties must participate on equal terms. We're with you. I hope our viewers know perfectly well what the China plan is. Make Russia strong so it doesn't have to take any responsibility, so that the sanctions are lifted, so that she keeps the territories she occupied, but in fact, Western democracy lost because that's how the cookie crumbles. In the end of the war, it turns out that the aggressor wins. Here, it seems to me, we need to keep reminding that we can't let China become stronger.
It seems like the activity of China, which has resumed against the backdrop of the ongoing elections in America and the possibility of Donald Trump coming to the White House, and Trump is known for his anti-China stance, well, in general, they are now becoming more actively involved in the process of peaceful resolution. That is what they refer to it as, the crisis in Ukraine. And this increased involvement is a significant development that cannot be ignored. Although this is, of course, a full-scale war, it's not just a crisis, it's Moscow's aggression towards Ukraine, which is obvious to everyone. However, I would like to mention that China is undertaking these actions in the context of other endeavors, which overall have not achieved significant success in facilitating peaceful negotiations, particularly in this regard as a general observation. In the past 23rd year, in early August, there was a G20 summit initiated by Saudi Arabia, also addressing the settlement of the war in Ukraine and the situation regarding the war. Before this, in the spring of 2022, there was a similar summit in Istanbul where Turkey took on the role of mediator in negotiations between Moscow and Kiev. And INAT also didn't succeed in these negotiations. Apparently, China has been waiting for a long time, well, at least after the summit in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where China also participated in this conference of the Global South, countries of the Global South, who have taken on the task of helping to resolve the war in Ukraine. Now he wants to take this initiative into his own hands. I will remind you, China has already successfully completed such a mission once between Saudi Arabia and Tehran, and also between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the past. And most likely wants to claim the laurels of a peacemaker in the war that is taking place in Ukraine. In my view, I reckon there isn't much chance there, but nevertheless, it is a useful move by China because it could potentially bring Kyiv closer to Beijing, which would have significant geopolitical implications in the region. In reality, Xi Jinping, the head of China, had a phone conversation with Zelensky at some point, and these consultations conducted by China's representative in Kiev, Li Huayue, could very well lead to the initiation of new bilateral negotiations between Beijing and Kiev, thereby fostering further diplomatic relations and cooperation between the two nations. And Zelensky possesses the capability to pay a visit to China. and this visit will create additional opportunities for Kiev to influence Moscow's position, which is currently only setting ultimatum conditions regarding the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, which it itself started and is actively involved in. And I think that China will be extremely cautious, despite its relationship with Moscow, Xi Jinping, and Putin. It will still maintain a distance, a certain distance between Moscow and Beijing, in order not to take responsibility for everything Moscow does. Moscow is completely unpredictable. China doesn't perceive any benefit. China desires and attains the main thing. As a consequence of this peacekeeping mission, he still has a desire to revisit the question regarding the potential integration of Taiwan into mainland China. This will be the reward for resolving the problem concerning the conflict in Ukraine. So I believe China will still make an effort to organize such a conference. I am doubtful about it. I do not believe that such a conference has a positive outlook. And first and foremost, due to the issue with Moscow, with Russia, the Russian leadership, the Kremlin, is not ready to make any compromises. I emphasize no compromises. Because everything they do, so to speak, is conducting confidential bilateral negotiations with Beijing, with other intermediaries. This is a scam. It's an attempt to drag the negotiation process into Kiev so that Western allies are forced to get involved in these negotiations and not solve anything. A significant part of Teli has already reached Ukraine. Moscow has occupied 20% of the territory, cut off a significant part of Ukraine from the Sea of Azov, from the basin and the Black Sea, and so on. So Moscow has the desire to acquire the entire Ukraine, but nonetheless, even the ones that have been achieved need to be consolidated and strengthened. We need everyone to default to agreeing that Donbass, Crimea, part of the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions are already an integral part of the Russian Federation. And it's precisely these kinds of consultations, transitioning into negotiations or peaceful conferences, that contribute to this, considering the protracted nature of the war. A war in Eastern Europe lasting for a period of 2 years is undeniably a tremendous length of time. It is astonishing that we are unable to identify comparable long-lasting crises or wars that occurred in Europe in the aftermath of World War II. The primary objective of Moscow is to prolong the conflict and employ every conceivable leverage in order to exert pressure on Kyiv and its allies.
It's important to emphasize that the majority of Ukrainian society does not recognize any separate agreements, does not recognize anything that is offered to us as surrender or withdrawal from our territories. Everything, absolutely everything, has to be, we need to bring back both our people and our territory. And here, of course, once more and again, we will endlessly stress how vital American leadership is to us. It's what largely ensures the stability of democracy, well, and the triumph of good over evil. About this, I must say, my friends, that Russia plays very dirty, very cunningly, and of course through IPSO, through propaganda, through various provocations and Western media, among other things. It would mean a great deal to us if you could support us and give us an opportunity to reach as many individuals as possible, particularly in the United States of America. The future depends not only on Americans, but also on America. Believe me, leave your likes, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel Vegan World. We'll be waiting to meet our viewers soon. Stay with us. Mark, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Alyona. Thanks to all the viewers of our channel.